Next up, we get to cover one of my absolute favorite CSS properties. It's called transform. So transform allows us to do a lot. We can rotate things and warp their perspective. We can scale them and stretch them and skew them. We can translate or move them across the page up or down and all sorts of things. We can do multiple at once. I can rotate something and scale it. Really, the thing that ties all this together is that we are transforming elements. If you have ever used Photoshop, there are similar transformations or transforms that we can apply to an image. You can rotate it, you can skew it, and I think they used to be, I don't know if they still are, but they used to be under a transform menu. Same concept here. So there's a lot to it, but we're going to step through one at a time. Before I do that, let me just show you the setup I have here. I've made a new document in a folder called transform, just like the pattern I've been following, and I have a bunch of H1s, which honestly, as the comment says, it's not a good idea in the real world to have multiple H1s, but here, really, we're not following any rational structure for a page anyway. It's just a bunch of headings. There's no content. So this is just for educational purposes. Don't copy that. Don't do a bunch of H1s in a real document. So I've done some nice fancy colors from one of these color palettes, and I've created different elements for us to transform. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is hop over to my CSS. I want to center these elements. I'm going to show you a way of doing this we have not yet seen using something called margin auto. So with a block level element, like an H1, if I set the left and right margin to be auto, that element is actually going to be centered in its container. So whatever space there is in this container will be automatically distributed to the left and the right. So I'll keep margin 20 pixels for the top and bottom, but I'll do auto for left and right on all H1s, and there we go. So it really doesn't matter for this video, but I figured I should show you at some point. Next up, let's actually take a look at transform. So as I showed you, there's a bunch of these different transform functions that we can use. And why don't we start with a simple one? Well, it's not that simple, but why don't we start with one of the easier to understand ones like rotate. So rotate takes a couple different units. It will accept, let's see, angles. We can specify as degrees, as radians, if you remember geometry, as gradients, g-radians, I don't think I ever learned those, and then also turns. So for example, we could do 360 degrees or 180 degrees. That would be a half turn. So we could also write 0.5 turn. Usually you'll see people using degrees, sometimes radians for certain things where it makes it easier, but generally degrees. So let's take this first H1 right here and let's rotate it. So I'm going to just select H1, nth of type. I'm going to do nth of type just to style each of these differently. So the very first H1, transform, and then rotate, and then a number of degrees. So how about 45 degrees? So this is a little different than other properties we've seen before. We have these parentheses, but overall same approach, property name and a value. So let's see what that looks like. Whoa, take a look at that. 2 rotated, transformed H1s. Now I actually wanted to just do the first one, but I broke this up into 2 sections for a reason we'll see later. So what I'm going to do is just say the first section, the first H1 inside of that. So section first of type, first H1 inside of that. Okay, so we've rotated it 45 degrees. You know, I could do something like 180 degrees. Totally upside down. I can also actually change where this rotation is happening from. So right now it happens in the middle of the element. Think about putting a pin right here and then rotating around that. But I can actually change the transform origin. There's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but frequently I'll just use these keywords like center or top left, bottom right. You can also offset it by number of pixels. So I'll show you what that would look like. If we go back to 45 degrees, this is happening around the middle of the element. What if I did the bottom right? So transform origin, bottom right. Now it is starting, basically putting a pin right there and rotating it to the right clockwise 45 degrees. So we lose most of that. If I did, top right, now it's rotating from this portion right here. So I'm not going to do that, but I'll keep that so you can just have a reference to transform origin. So that's rotate, traditional rotate. We're rotating an element around a fixed point on the 2D plane. But we also have things like rotate X and rotate Y, where we rotate around one of the axes, So you can see things like this. Imagine, it's kind of 3D space where we are rotating it away from us versus if we rotate on the y-axis, we're rotating it as if it's on a pole or something. And then we can rotate on the z-axis as well. So I don't use those as often, but they are sometimes useful when you're making 3D effects, like a card that turns around and shows another side behind it. But again, this is just an intro, so we're not going to go crazy. Next, let's take a look at scale. So scale is another transform function that we can use that will change the size of an element. We can grow it or shrink it. And there are different variants of scale. Once again, scale X, Y, Z, scale 3D, or just scale. Let's just go with regular old scale for now. So let's take this second one right there. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing. First section, nth of type 2, so that's second H1. We're going to set scale to be maybe 0.5. Need my semicolon. Refresh. And it scales down both on the X and Y axis. It's shrinking equally by a factor of half. It's half as large. We could scale it up. If I did 2, I'm going to double its size. Much larger. And we also have options to pass in more than one value. So I could do 2, how about just 1. And you'll see what happens here is that the height stays the same, but the width is scaled by 2. So we also have separate scale X and scale Y. So I could do scale Y by 2 to get the same, or the opposite effect rather, where we double the height along the Y-axis, but the X-axis, the width stays the same. So this is another transformation. I'm scaling something. I think I'm going to go back to just shrinking it down though. So scale, how about 0.6? It just expects a number. Next up, we have translate. Translate allows us to take one element and move it around. So we can move it to the right, move it up, move it down, or do both at the same time. So we have a translate X, translate Y. Also, we're ignoring the 3D stuff, at least for now. So let's just look at X and Y. So if I want to move something horizontally, I can use translate X. And I need to pass in, there's a couple different values, but it's either a length or some percentage. And that length can be really any unit that we've seen. It could be ems, rems, pixels, even centimeters or inches if you wanted to, or we can pass in a percentage. So let's try it. Let's do a translate X on the third one down here. So nth of type 3, translate X, how about 200 pixels? Okay. So I'm going to refresh our page here, and it's moved over 300 pixels. And let's do the one below it, nth of type 4, but we'll actually, instead of translating X, well, I'll just show you can do negative pixels as well to move it to the left. We also have translate Y. So if I did negative 200 pixels on the Y-axis, it moves up. Or if I did positive 200, or how about, 100, so we can see the other ones. It moves down. It's translated down. And then we also just have translate, which takes two values, an X and a Y. So let's say I want to move it left and I want to move it down. So left will be, I don't know how much we want to do, negative 200 pixels, and then downwards, maybe 100 pixels. And there we go. Well, maybe I won't do 100 here. Maybe we'll do 50. Sure. Okay. So that's translate, right? This is going to move something across the page. The last one we'll take a look at here is skew. So skew is going to skew an element on a 2D plane. We also have skew X, skew Y, and it accepts angles, so degrees or radians or turns or gradients. So let's play around with that. Let's go back to our document here. Let's do our next section. So that will be section nth of type 2. Take the first H1. And now I'm going to give this a transform, skew, how about, 30 degrees on X and Y. And there you go. That's what one example of skewing looks like. Let's do one more. We can also pass in two values. So I could do 10 degrees for our X skew, and then, 25 degrees for the Y skew. And there we are. Now let's maybe dial that back a bit, maybe 5 degrees. Okay. So those are all examples of individual transform functions that we can apply. And we can also apply more than one. We can combine them if we just separate them by spaces. So I could rotate something let's take this third example. I can rotate it and make it larger or shrink it down or whatever I want at the same time. So I'll do that here. Let's select it. So nth of type 3. I'm going to rotate it. So rotate, and how much? Maybe 90 degrees. And I'm going to scale it by a little bit, maybe 1.2, maybe 1.3. Let's start with that. Okay, so it's bigger and it's rotated. Maybe instead of 90, we'll do like 20 degrees. Can you tell? Hopefully you can. We can also do negative degrees. Haven't shown that, but you could go the other direction. There's negative 20. And then we'll do one more at the very bottom, nth of type 4. Let's also move something around. So let's translate it all the way over to the left, maybe. Not all the way over, but significantly over to the left. Translate x, maybe negative 300 pixels. Let's just see what that looks like. Maybe even more. Okay, I think 500 pixels will work. And then let's also, how about we turn it upside down? So rotate it upside down, which will be 180 degrees. Or just to mix it up, how about half a turn, which I never really use, but we can. It's upside down. And is there anything else we should do? How about we scale it upwards? So we stretch it out upwards. So that will be scale y. How about 1.5? And there it is. Okay. So crazy looking web page. The other thing I'll just mention about Transform that's important is it's actually going to apply to whatever the contents are of our element. So it's not just limited to our H1, but if we had a button in the H1, which is not very common, but if I'll put a button right there, I'll delete it, but you'll see that button is also transformed, in this case, rotated. Or the reason I actually put sections around this is that I can select one of these sections. What should we do here? Maybe take the bottom one, these guys, and let's shrink the whole thing down or rotate the whole thing. So section nth of type, I'm now operating on the section. I'm going to scale the whole thing down, 0.7. Take a look, everything shrinks in that section. Or I could rotate it, right? Rotate, or why don't I translate it? Translate x, maybe 500 pixels to the right. There we go. So that's very important to understand about Transform as well, is that everything we do is going to apply to not only the parent element, but also its contents. And this makes it super powerful, right? We can do all sorts of animations and cool effects with transformations. We have yet to do any of that, but we can. So that's a rough intro to Transform. There's a lot to cover, right? And you'll always be referencing the docs, and especially if you get into the 3D stuff, if every time I do that, I have to remind myself how it works. It's not even reminding. I have to relearn the whole darn thing. So there's no shame in that. We didn't cover matrix and perspective, but we covered the basic ones, and those are really commonly used. So that's Transform, one of my favorites.